This program, while curated to help you improve your health, contains general advice and should not replace the individual advice of your medical practitioner.
The pill is chemical castration. There's really no other way to look at it.
Upwards of 58% of women are using birth control primarily for symptom management.
There is some evidence that going on the pill at a young age in adolescence is associated with depression and anxiety.
The majority of women struggle when they break up with birth control.
I didn't know what it was like to feel like me until I stopped taking the pill.
We don't have to be afraid, we just need to be informed.
In life, it's normal to have ups and downs. But what do we do when we get stuck? I've always been fascinated by the healing journey. Why do some people get better while others fail to make the shift? In Season 2 of The Shift, we explore the intricate world of women's health and help you discover how to balance your hormones and understand yourself better so that you can truly thrive.
The menstrual cycle is a vital sign of female well-being.
My mum just used to say, "Oh, Nan, I'm so sorry. It's part of being a woman."
I would like a call to arms for women to know that their intuition isn't lying to them.
I'm Katherine Maslen, and this is The Shift. Hello and welcome to episode 4 of season 2 of The Shift. In this episode, I'm going to deep dive into the oral contraceptive pill and other types of hormonal contraception. But before I get started, I want to frame this episode with this. By presenting this information, we're not saying that we're anti-pill or anti-contraception. Our intention is simply to present some very relevant information so that in the event that you use these drugs, you're aware of the mechanism, risks, and what you need to do to protect yourself if possible. Sometimes when we hear negative health information, it can cause a lot of fear or confusion. The purpose of this episode is to present the current research and empower you to have what you need to look after your whole health. Let's get started with talking to Dr. Jolene Brighton, who's the author of the amazing book Beyond the Pill. Dr. Jolene has been working with women for years as a naturopathic physician and counsels many women through the world of hormones and birth control.
So I'm not anti-birth control. I come from this huge family. If it wasn't for birth control, it would be like 3 times the size. And because of it, it's a tool that I used. It was, for me personally, the right choice for me not to become pregnant while I was in college. But there was so much I was never told. When I look back, I'm like, I never really got the informed consent, and not because my doctor was a bad person, but because there's just so much information about birth control that doctors don't even receive. That, I get into conversations with researchers and my eyes are open because this isn't part of clinical training. Like, we're all taught the birth control pill is the best thing that ever happened to women. Take it, say thank you, don't question it because they might take it away. Which is the tricky thing. We have to advocate for access while we also advocate for information, education, and help women make the best decision for themselves. And so, I thought I was a freak, and I thought I was the only one that could have lost their period coming off of birth control or had any of these things happen. It was once I was in clinical practice that I realized that, wow, the majority of women struggle when they break up with birth control. And there is a lot of research out there showing us how it touches every single system in your body. And it all makes sense. Like, it's a huge hormonal shift.
Can you tell me what you observe with usage of the pill, why women seek it, besides obviously contraception, and sort of the flavor around that whole process of them having a problem and then ending up on the pill?
What we've now come to understand from surveys is that upwards of 58% of women are using birth control primarily for symptom management. So yes, the benefits of pregnancy prevention are there as well, but when they say why'd you want to start birth control? Acne, painful periods, heavy periods, period problems that go unnamed, that fits into a category where they're like something that we don't know what's going on. And so, we see really the grouping of period problems, painful, heavy, irregular, long, maybe they're lasting more than 7 days. And then acne, of course, and really any of the symptoms that accompany polycystic ovarian syndrome. So that's the cystic acne, that might be hair loss on the head, hair growth on the chin, chest, abdomen. The tricky thing is that birth control doesn't always work for everyone when it comes to acne or hair loss. And it actually can be what instigates hair loss in some women. So why are women going on birth control for all these symptoms? Well, Part of it's easy, right? You just take a pill and your acne, your skin clears. That's awesome. But it's also all they're being offered. The Endocrine Society now advises against using birth control for hypothalamic amenorrhea, that is loss of your period. And with that, you'll still see doctors prescribing it for that. And the reason why the Endocrine Society says no is because you don't know if she ever gets her period back. You're just putting one more variable into the equation. In addition to that, like we wouldn't know if like under training, like reducing your training, eating more, making these shifts were actually effective at all. And it's really just kicking the can down the road where women are not getting answers to what's going on. And the argument used to be, well, we put her on birth control to protect her bone health, but now research has come out and shown it's actually not that beneficial to put her on that. And what would be a better, course of action would be using something like hormone replacement therapy, like we do in menopause, if we wanted to use hormones to be protective. Because the dose it takes of like a bioidentical topical hormone to protect your bones is much less than the dose it takes to shut down your ovaries from producing eggs.
The pill is chemical castration. There's really no other way to look at it. The contraceptive drugs in the pill are dosed such that they shut down ovarian function almost completely. They induce a chemically induced temporary menopause. If you try to measure hormones when a woman's on the pill, she has none. Her estrogen and progesterone are in the menopausal range. And those hormones are being replaced by contraceptive drugs, which are not the same as our own estradiol, which is our main estrogen, and we're not the same as our own progesterone, have some of the same effects, but have also many opposite effects. And so that loss of ovarian hormones while on the pill is why women on the pill have altered brain structure compared to women who cycle naturally, have less healthy bones because they're not able to build bone density the way they would if they had estrogen and progesterone from natural menstrual cycles. And also another just example of that is women on the pill can develop, vaginal dryness, loss of libido, and changes, shrinking of the clitoris, which is concerning and sad, that is not dissimilar to, changes that happen with menopause. So in the simplest terms, I would say that contraceptive drugs rob women of their own hormones.
That was Dr. Lara Bryden, who you heard from a lot in the last episode when we were discussing what a healthy menstrual cycle looked like. What Dr. Lara is saying here is that the pill does not balance our hormones, as many women are taught. It actually just downregulates them and puts you into a flatline hormonal state. This means that when you take your blank pills and you bleed each month, it's not really a period, but rather a drug withdrawal bleed. So this begs the question, is there any impact to just taking the pill all the time and not bleeding at all?
There was never a medical reason to bleed monthly on the pill because a pill bleed is not a menstrual cycle. And so the only reason to give contraceptive drugs to address the problem of irregular cycles is either one, to give a false reassurance that women are having a monthly bleed, which has no purpose, or to prevent the abnormal thickening of the uterine lining that can occur with long-term anovulatory bleeds. So the second reason is valid in that if ovulation is not occurring regularly, if the uterine lining is thickening, then something has to be done. But that something does not have to be a fake period every month on contraceptive drugs. That serves no purpose. And through my lens, I feel like if we can start to use the correct words for things, that itself will create a change in women's health, because the misunderstanding that pill bleeds are real periods has lots of downstream negative effects. So it's certainly, I think it has a negative effect for women themselves when they believe that by taking the pill, they've corrected something with their health, when in fact they've just masked the problem and are not having real periods. And the other negative downstream effect from calling pill bleeds periods is that we start to get this weird messaging from scientists and doctors that women don't need periods. And what they're really talking about is that women don't need monthly pill bleeds. which is 100% true. But what that's not acknowledging is that women do require a regular natural menstrual cycle, an ovulatory cycle, to make hormones.
Personally, I'm not a big fan of my patients skipping their pill bleed either, as even though it's not a proper period, changes in the way they experience this can tell me that something is wrong. To give you an example, if you used to have your pill bleed without fuss, and now around that time you also get a headache, this can tell me that your body's not metabolizing the hormonal drugs the same way, and we may need help to correct this.
I did not know how my menstrual cycle worked until medical school. So anyone listening, if that's true for you, no shame. But with birth control, how the pill specifically works, how any of these medications work to shut down the ovulation cycle is on the brain. So it's a high enough dose of hormones to tell your brain to stop talking to your ovaries. And then you are no longer this cyclical creature. You are static with these hormones. So you don't ovulate, which is fantastic, right? If you don't want to get pregnant, that's a great mechanism. So this is the primary mechanism, how birth control works. Now, when it comes to like progestin IUD, some women do continue to ovulate. But progestin, not progesterone, progestin also has the benefit of changing the cervical mucus so that sperm can't reach the egg. Some of these will also alter fallopian tube motility. So if you did happen to ovulate, you will not usher that egg to meet the sperm. And then they also have a mechanism of shutting down the receptors in the endometrial lining so that your endometrium, this is what we shed monthly if we're cycling naturally, your endometrium doesn't build up. So even if an egg became fertilized, it wouldn't be able to implant. And this is a moment where some women are like, oh my gosh, like, wait, so the pill is an abortifactant? Well, not technically speaking. So from a scientific perspective, once implantation occurs, that is when conception is defined. If your belief is different than that, I'm not here to argue beliefs. I believe everybody has a right to their beliefs, but just to understand that that is a way down the line if all else fails mechanism, but it is a mechanism that comes into play for some women if everything else didn't work. But, you know, the pill is pretty effective at shutting down ovulation. It's about 91% effective with typical use.
You just heard from Dr. Jolene Brighton again. What I want to bring up at this point is not to freak out if you're on the pill at this stage. This isn't about getting you to stop your hormonal contraception, but rather to help you really understand how it works and what the risks are so that you can know what to do next with your health. One of the problems here is that there's a general sense that the pill is completely safe and even beneficial. But when you look closer, you can see that there are many misconceptions around the way that it works. Dr. Lara Bryden has this to say.
There's this narrative that contraceptive drugs are good enough for women's health, and they're not. They don't do the job that our hormones do. There has been a narrative that if women have lost their periods to undereating, which is quite common, there's been this idea that if you give the combined oral contraceptive, which is an estrogen-containing pill, that can help to protect the bones from that situation of amenorrhea or lack of periods. But what we know now is that it doesn't do that very well. So the pill cannot rescue the bones of women who've lost their periods. And more importantly, the pill and all types of hormonal birth control impair bone health to some extent in women who would otherwise be cycling naturally, right? So women who cycle naturally have stronger, healthier bones than women who use hormonal birth control.
If you're curious about your hormonal health, take our quiz. You'll get a report with insights into some key areas you need to look at when it comes to getting your hormones in alignment, as well as some handy tips to get you started. Go to theshiftclinic.com/links.
The Shift!
You've heard a few of our experts touch on the side effects of the pill, and we're going to explore this more deeply. Since we have hormonal receptors all over our bodies, it makes sense that the impact of the oral contraceptive pill is not going to be isolated to your ovaries and uterus. One of the places where we have significant estrogen and progesterone receptors is in our brains. Over my years of practice, I have observed many women who report significant changes in their moods, personality, and even their zest for life when taking oral contraceptives. This is really important to know, as without this knowledge, you might suspect something else is wrong, turning to drug therapy to deal with your emotional changes when really you need to reevaluate your birth control.
At this time, we don't have any research to say that birth control causes depression, but we do have studies to show an association. And yet for decades, we had research that was actually poorly done, saying there was no connection whatsoever. So women are getting on birth control, they're crying their eyes out. I had a formulation of the pill that happened to me. They're having anxiety, panic attacks, and they're being told, it's just you. Women, here's this story that's played out forever, are hysterical or emotional, and you're just met with another medication. It wasn't until 2016 that we had a large study of over 1 million women come out and show us that, 23% more likely to be prescribed an antidepressant and receive the diagnosis of depression if you start the pill. And everybody's like, oh, it's not estrogen again. And then the research kept coming, showing us that IUDs aren't much better, that progestin-based aren't much better. So that's just one aspect. Why I bring that up is because as soon as that study came out, there were people lining up, doctors, researchers, Google experts, to dismiss women. And to say, it was the first time a study came out and validated women, that women were like, oh my gosh, I knew it wasn't me. I knew it wasn't broken. And finally, maybe my doctor will listen to me. And then you saw people saying, well, this study's only observational. This is not, it's not a randomized control trial. So no, it's not real. And that blow to women, we had women writing us just saying this story's come back. Now I'm just crazy again. My doctor refuses to even read the study and says it wasn't well done. And here it all came. Then I'm like, it's very easy and convenient to dismiss women, to gaslight women, and to say, oh, it's all in your head. However, it is in your head because that's where it's eliciting its effect, right? If you're on birth control, okay. So the hormones, they're in your head. However, when you talk with researchers, what's so interesting, and it just is really striking to me, you'll talk to clinicians and they feel like it's black and white. I read the study, you will either have this experience or you will not. And when you talk to researchers, they always bring up this interesting point that everybody really needs to grasp, and that is, it's gray. And we always expect there to be outliers. And when you report research, you are reporting what is statistically significant. Sometimes, decades later, sometimes, a few years later, they start to figure out, oh, this is what that data means. This is what might be going on. But just because it didn't get reported on and it's not being sensationalized by the news doesn't mean there's not outliers. We expect paradoxical effects to medications. We expect that people are going to have different responses. Birth control is no different. And this is the thing that we often forget. It is a pharmaceutical. It is a drug. It is a medication, and that isn't going to have the same effect on every single woman.
Again, we touch on this concept of women being ignored and led to believe they can't trust their own body's wisdom. I have had so many patients have a doctor point blank tell them that there is no evidence that the oral contraceptive or Mirena IUD, for that matter, can impact their moods. I like to call this medical gaslighting, and it's something that many women experience. I can't help but think of a patient that I saw a couple of years ago. She'd called me on the Christmas break, desperate to get an appointment. When she sat down in front of me, she began to cry and told me that she was numb. She said that she was getting married and wasn't excited about it at all. She shared with me that she was having suicidal thoughts because she could not find any joy in her life. We looked at her nutrition, stress, and the regular suspects, but what became very clear was that the mood issues began shortly after getting her Mirena IUD put in. A couple of months later, she decided to get it removed, and I could not believe the transformation in her. She was glowing, excited about her wedding, her relationship was thriving, and she even plucked up the courage to quit her toxic job, which was something that we'd been talking about for months. This isn't an isolated case. I see this happening all the time, and I can't fathom how some clinicians can't see this pattern emerging.
Contraceptive drugs of any type can have mood side effects. And for decades, women have been saying this, and clinicians have been observing it, that women can experience depression and anxiety from the pill, from the implant, from the hormonal IUD. And unfortunately, especially with regard to the pill, we've also had decades of doctors saying, no, that's not possible. I think the time has definitely come where we can say with confidence, contraceptive drugs can cause mood side effects, and doctors need to start being alert to that because it is a common story. I've seen it with my patients for decades where women, especially young women, start the pill and then end up on an antidepressant within the next 9 to 12 months and often are not connecting the two things. And it makes sense if it's a teenager, there's lots of changes going on. Someone might not, be savvy enough to say, wait, could this be the pill that you started 6 or 9 months ago? Could that be affecting your mood? But I think the more women talk about it, the information will get out there and hopefully doctors will start to connect the dots and maybe be able to, rather than prescribing another drug, an antidepressant on top of the pill, be able to say, well, maybe it's worth switching to a non-hormonal method of contraception for a while to see if that improves your mood. I have so many stories from my own patients about how coming off the pill lifted their mood. One of my favorite ones was a young woman in her 20s who'd been on the pill since she was in her early teens, as is not unusual. And she finally stopped it. And what she said to me was that it was like a curse was lifted. Other phrases I've heard is, I've come back to myself. All the color has come back into the world.
Nat Kringoudis is a doctor of Chinese medicine with a busy practice in Melbourne, Australia. I had to ask her what she had observed in her patients over the years.
The mental health part of it's actually huge. And I, again, see so many women that just don't feel, and they know they don't feel good on it. Most of them know they don't feel good on it. And so I have seen everything from major depression, anxiety, right through to they will feel like they hate half of their life. Every cycle, half of it they love and the other half they hate. Also, these numb emotions, like I don't really know how I feel. I'm kind of nor here nor there. I know I used to love my partner. Now is it that I've just been with him for too long, or do I not love him anymore? Where are my emotions gone? So I see all of this, and a lot of girls now, what I will try and do is see if I can actually get them feeling better whilst they're taking the contraception. It can be dangerous to say straight up to women, don't take that. And it's a conversation that they need to also be having with their healthcare provider and then whoever's prescribed it for them.
This approach that Nat Kringoudis takes is similar to how we work at Shift. When someone wants to come off contraceptive drugs, they need to talk to their prescribing physician and they don't necessarily need to come off them cold turkey. Often we can work with the rest of their health so that when they do come off the drugs, the transition is easier. If you have had acne or painful periods or other significant issues, sometimes it's worthwhile having a transition period before you stop your contraceptives so that we can work towards the smoothest transition for you. There may also be circumstances where a patient can't come off their contraceptive drugs or that they choose not to for a certain reason. Our approach at Shift would be to then look at what we can do to get the patient symptom-free while they're still taking the medication if possible. Changing your medication is always a decision that should be made with your healthcare provider, and if you don't feel heard and supported by your physician, then it's time to seek someone new. It's worthwhile mentioning at this point that these side effects don't happen for everyone, so you need to look at your individual circumstance. Let's explore what other issues could arise from using contraceptives.
One of the things that blew my mind, and I always question this, when I got into the research and saw that there were case studies in which doctors were reporting that they had higher incidences of Crohn's disease. More often, women with Crohn's disease were getting surgeries while they were using the pill. This was back in the 1970s, and we've seen more research coming out showing that, birth control is one of the many pharmaceuticals that can mess with the microbiome. In fact, some researchers have compared it to the effects of antibiotics on the microbiome. It can lead to intestinal hyperpermeability. So just like your NSAIDs and other pharmaceuticals can, this can cause what most people know as leaky gut. And if you have a family history of Crohn's disease, which is to say you have the genetics, then there's a study that says you're 300% increased risk after 5 years on the pill of developing Crohn's disease. There are studies that have shown us that you may require additional surgeries. And there were case studies, back in the 70s, 80s, looking at, wow, and if we remove birth control, some of these inflammatory bowel disease patients go right into remission.
That was Dr. Jolene Brighton again. We spoke about this association in episode 8 on season 1 of The Shift, this strong association between the oral contraceptive pill and inflammatory bowel disease. If you haven't listened to season 1 of The Shift, I'd highly recommend it. What about the impact of the pill on your fertility? I asked Dr. Lara Bryden to go over the research for me.
There was some early research from decades ago, like from the 70s, where they found that women could take the pill for a few years and then stop it and then, ovulate fairly quickly and go on to have healthy pregnancies. I think what that research failed to capture was the modern practice of giving contraceptive drugs to young teenagers and suppressing their menstrual cycle, their communication between their brain and their ovaries, their calibration or maturation of their menstrual cycle at a young age, which robs them of the opportunity to mature their menstrual cycle, which very much does mean when they finally come off in their 30s, they may have trouble ovulating straight away. There's a big difference between a woman who had natural menstrual cycles for the first decade of her life, maybe had a baby, healthy pregnancy, and then went on the pill for a few years and then stopped it and then, finds her periods come back and all is well. That's a very different situation than a girl who went on the pill at 11 years old and took it continuously until 32 and tried to come off and then tried to ovulate for essentially the first time. That's what we're seeing now, because this practice of giving the pill younger and younger has really been ramping up over the last couple of decades. So I think we're now starting to see something quite different than when the pill was first invented. One of the questions I ask my patients when they're trying to come off the pill in their 30s, they don't know what to expect. And they're asking me, what's going to happen? Am I going to get my period back? What is it going to be like? The question I always ask is, what were your real periods like before you ever took contraceptive drugs? Because what I'm hoping for is they at least had a few years, maybe not the 12 years that it takes to mature a menstrual cycle, but even just 3 or 4, in my experience, gives them a resilience to coming off contraceptive drugs, that when they do come off contraceptive drugs, their ovulation can kick in. Sometimes I'm sitting with patients who are, you're 35 and you've never had a menstrual cycle. But even in that situation, it can come back. The body is resilient. It will find a way, but it can take a couple of years at that point to establish a menstrual cycle.
This comes back down to what was discussed earlier. If you're put on the oral contraceptive pill to address a period issue, then it's not going to heal it, and it may still be there when you choose to come off it and have a family. This is why at Shift we recommend that people come off their contraceptives at least 6 months prior to when they want to start trying to have a family, as this may give them time to catch issues that might come up and potentially time for your hormonal system to come back online. We've got more on fertility coming up in episode 13. One of the other big impacts of taking the pill is on our libido or sex drive. This obviously has a huge knock-on effect when it comes to our relationships and our quality of life. So I asked Dr. Jolene Bryden what she thought and if there was anything else we needed to look out for.
While on hormonal birth control, some women do have sexual health issues. So libido can drop, which can be really frustrating for you and your partner because you're like, yay, we don't have to worry about getting pregnant. Oh, but I'm not interested anymore. In addition to that, some women do develop pain with sex. They can have vaginal dryness, vaginal atrophy, but also develop vulvodynia and different chronic pelvic pain issues. This isn't universal for all women, but you need to be advised of this because if your birth control is blocking you in the bedroom and you think it's just you, that can evolve into a mental health issue, a relationship issue. So we need to have the right information. In addition, women on the pill may be more susceptible to yeast infections. So this is something women also need to be aware of. If you're getting chronic infections, the chronic yeast infections, it may be your birth control. And part of that is because these hormones do alter our microbiome, and yeast is part of the microbiome. And for everybody listening, Your microbiome isn't just in your gut. There's a gut microbiome, a skin microbiome. There's even now a hair follicle microbiome going on. And your vagina definitely has its own ecosystem. Last thing I didn't talk about was cardiovascular risk. Clots and strokes and heart attacks. And yeah, those are real risks while you're on birth control. Certain genetic factors can predispose you. If you ask the average woman, what does a heart attack look like in a woman? They'll usually tell you, oh, radiating pain in the arm, the jaw, that's a man. Maybe that'll happen for you. Maybe you'll just be tired, have indigestion, and feel like you're having flu-like symptoms. Like, it can present differently. So the risk of clot in a healthy young female population, low. But the risk of dying from a clot because you're a woman is actually high. So women are more likely to be dismissed for pain and even for heart attacks going into the emergency room. We are more likely to die of a stroke and a heart attack and be dismissed by our doctors. And when we talk about if that clot dislodges and hits your lungs, that's a pulmonary embolism, 20 to 25% of people die from that. Like, that's the statistics we're looking at. So we can say, yes, the risk is low, but we have to really come at it. What are we talking about here? This is a significant health event.
Okay, so by now you might be raising an eyebrow and wondering why your doctor hasn't mentioned any of this stuff to you. One of the things that commonly happens in medicine is that when a drug is used in such a widespread way, it can be perceived as completely safe. But no drug comes without risk. And without being informed, we can't make a clear decision whether it is right for us or not. Informed consent means that your doctor has given you all of the relevant information before you choose to begin a medication or a medical procedure. I asked Katherine Maslen why she thought women perceive the pill as being so inert.
I think for so long we've put our faith in and love the idea of this one pill, this one thing that you can do every day that will do X, Y, and Z. And I think also we haven't been provided with the information at the time of prescription. And again, that's not necessarily your doctor's fault. I'll still argue with doctors, gynecologists, that it's not actually effective in terms of many things and that it has implications. And they will still say, no, it's been proven to be completely safe. There is not one drug on the market that's completely safe. So why would the pill be any different? I'm not opposed to the pill. I think that people just need to understand what it does. And that's really the problem. So many women will say, I didn't know I wasn't ovulating on the pill. I didn't know that it could have an impact on my long-term health. The information's not given to them. And some women will argue black and blue that, you know, that the pill doesn't do X, Y, and Z. It's like, that's what it's designed to do. It's designed to flatline your hormones. It's designed to stop your ovaries from working. It doesn't allow for the ebbs and flows necessarily that our bodies need to feel good. And the other thing that I'll find women say it on the other side of that is, I didn't know what it was like to feel like me until I stopped taking the pill. And so it does. It alters so many things in our bodies. It alters our pheromones. There's research that it suggests it alters our ability to attract a suitable partner. So I think we need to have more information at the time of prescription so that women can make an informed choice. And should they then go ahead and choose to use the pill, they can do a whole lot of other things to help to preserve their health as much as possible. The other issue I think with the pill is we don't know how you're going to respond until you start to take it. And so I think it comes down to education, really.
That relationship one is pretty controversial, so I'd like to share with you what the research has shown in this area. There have been a few studies that have shown that women who are taking the oral contraceptive pill choose men with different facial features than those who are cycling naturally. There has also been a study that showed that women taking the pill when they met their partner reported lower sexual satisfaction and lower levels of partner attraction than their non-pill taking counterparts. This gets more interesting. In a study of 275 women, it was found that those taking the oral contraceptive pill were more jealous of their partners overall. While this is a small study, it's still food for thought and highly plausible given that our pheromones play a big role in which partner we choose, and the pill can change our pheromones. These studies are in early stages, but it's worth opening up a conversation about, especially since there are such high rates of sexual dissatisfaction with women and a heap of issues with libido and sexuality anyway, which we're going to talk a lot about in episode 14. Another area of concern that I'm coaching my patients on is the fact that the oral contraceptive pill impacts many nutrients throughout the body. Here, Dr. Jolene Brighton explains.
When I was getting my degree in nutrition, we were taught birth control could lead to nutrient deficiencies. This is something that, I remember sitting in class, here I am in my 20s, looking at this slide, and I'm like, whoa, hold up. I'm being taught on one hand that multivitamins are just expensive pee and that we should focus on food first. I agree, you should focus on food first. But it's very hard that I've seen clinically to out-diet the birth control pill. It touches so many nutrients. So B12, folate, magnesium, zinc, selenium, vitamin C, vitamin E, CoQ10, these are the ones that we know about.
The action step you can take from this is that as long as you're taking contraceptive drugs, it's a smart idea to be on a good quality multivitamin to help counteract this effect somewhat. What about the use of oral contraceptives on young women? Issues like PCOS, period pain, and endometriosis are happening in younger and younger women. Add this to the fact that girls are getting their periods earlier, and we see a lot more prescriptions of contraceptive drugs in younger girls than we used to. It wouldn't be uncommon for me to see a 12 or 13-year-old girl present to me that was already taking contraception. Now, let's explore the impact of this and what you might need to consider if you're counselling your daughter on whether to take these drugs. Dr. Peter Wright has worked extensively in adolescent gynecology. I asked her what the risks were of putting a girl on contraceptives when they were too young.
If a young woman and their mother came in to see me with a period problem, such as pain or any other problems, and they're considering the pill, the things that they need to know are if the pill is started within a couple of years of first getting a period, at that time, the brain and the ovaries system, that's only just starting to develop. It's not fully mature, and it's not actually fully mature for 8 years. But many women will have irregular cycles for the first couple of years while their brain and their ovaries are just figuring out how to talk to each other. Because the pill stops the brain and the ovaries from communicating with each other, it basically cuts off that communication so that it's not able to practice. So what I see a lot of is women who have been put on the pill at 13, a year after they've had a period, perhaps to regulate their cycles, which is my biggest bugbear in the whole history of the world, because it doesn't regulate your cycle. It just turns everything off. And then these women think, oh, it's fine because now I've had regular periods since I went on the pill. But they're not having a regular period. They're having a withdrawal bleed. They're not ovulating, and their bodies are just, their ovaries and their brain have just turned off. And when I tell women like that, who are sometimes 40 years old, they're completely shocked that that's been happening, and they've had no idea, and they've been thinking that they've been having a natural period for the last 20 years. So the danger is that if your brain-ovary connection isn't well developed, if you then stay on the pill for 15 years and you go off it when you're 35 and you've had a brain and ovary system that hasn't been able to practice and reach maturity and be able to reach that beautiful fine-tuning of ovulation each month, when you go off the pill, that's when I see women who might notice that their periods don't return normally. Their brain and their ovary has to learn how to communicate with each other again, and that can take some time. And you might not have that time when you're 35. And I see this, and then these women are impatient, of course, because they want to have the baby, their clock's ticking, and they're then fed right into the tunnel of IVF and fertility treatments, which they may not have ever had to have if only their bodies were able to mature, because they don't have a mature reproductive system at that point. The other ones that I think there's increasingly more evidence for is the effect of the pill on our brain development. So we know that the brain isn't fully developed and matured until we're about 25. We know that adolescence is a really crucial period of time where the brain organises and matures. And that's in response to hormones, so testosterone and estrogen and progesterone and all of those things. And I think we're only just starting to understand how those hormones actually affect the brain. There is some evidence that going on the pill at a young age in adolescence is associated with depression and anxiety, and that risk can continue even when young women go off the pill in their 20s. and it may be changing the brain permanently. There's also evidence that it changes the way our stress response is wired, so that women who are put on the pill may be taking less risks because we don't have the effect of testosterone, which is like this hormone of confidence and agency and all of that, and we don't have that. I think that's really important for women and their mothers and their fathers to understand. And I've seen multiple women who have been on the pill or about to go on an antidepressant and then made a connection and then have gone off their pill and been fine and haven't had to, go down any other treatment for depression. So it's important that women understand that this is a possibility, that their moods and how they feel and their bodies can change, and that if they are feeling that when they're on the pill, that they can recognise it and trial going off it. If they go off it and nothing's changed, then it's not the pill, but it could be. And so it's important that they understand that.
Reviews help us know that we're hitting the mark with what you need and help us to shape future seasons. I'd really appreciate it if you could take a few moments to leave us a review. I would love to know what you think.
The Shift!
The purpose of this episode is to give you as much information as possible so that you can be aware of what contraceptive drugs do and what effects they may be having that you need to be aware of. I really think that these drugs are essential and that when used correctly have an important part of the medical landscape. As you've heard from our experts though, we have an issue of overprescribing and under-monitoring, which has led to the unnecessary suffering of many women taking these drugs. I wanted to ask Dr. Peter Wright what she thought about the capability of doctors to address these issues.
I see women like this all of the time who maybe they go to the doctor and they're recommended the pill and maybe mum thinks, I don't feel quite right about it. And so she'll come and see me and we talk about all of the things. It requires a lot of time, which I don't think our medical model gives women to understand, to educate. That's huge, right? Because if a woman has got pain and they've got a fear associated with that pain, it's actually okay to have some downtime around your period. That's another thing that's probably a controversial opinion that I have, but this idea that women have to power on, that question of do you have any days off from school or work or whatever when you have your period, I actually would like to live in a society where women are allowed to have a day off when they have their period, because women are not men. And just by admitting that doesn't mean that we are weaker or less able to cope in the world, but it means we're different. And I think that we shouldn't have to live in a world that's entirely 1,000% catered just for one gender anymore.
Rachel is a Shift member that has been working with us to bring back her natural menstrual cycles. After being put on the oral contraceptive pill at the age of 22, Rachel got relief from her pain and what she thought was a regular period, but then noticed that things didn't feel quite right for her. I asked her what kind of shift she'd seen since working with us at Shift.
So coming off the pill was something that I did, and sort of managing that. So I completely pretty much cut out dairy and gluten out of my diet, which was just amazing. Just like I noticed how clear my mind felt not being on that, just how much better I could concentrate, my energy levels. I was sleeping better. I was also diagnosed with anxiety around the time that I was diagnosed with PCOS. And at the same time they put me on the pill, they told me to go on to an antidepressant for anxiety. And when they did that, they also never suggested getting counselling or talking to someone about it. With seeing a naturopath, I was able to come off that and learn a bit more about that. And I was able to manage my anxiety much better just with like diet and lifestyle and not have to be on a tablet, which was great.
What's been the most difficult part to shift for you?
I think just my diet and lifestyle. That was when everything really did change. And I think before that, the general opinion, I think we just think we can take medication and things are fixed. And once I realised that it's so much more than that, that I really had to make a complete lifestyle change with my diet and everything, that's when everything sort of followed. As soon as I changed my diet, cut out dairy and cut out gluten and, made sure I was getting regular exercise and looked after my mental health and practiced mindfulness and sort of did all that, everything followed. My skin improved, my mood improved, my period came and everything sort of followed, yeah.
How many periods have you had since you came off the pill?
So I've had 3 and it was like it's come irregularly. So it sort of came and then it didn't come for a little bit and came again. And it actually hasn't come for a few months now.
It can take some time for the body to come back into balance in the process of healing, but with the right support, you can usually get your cycles back online. I was curious to ask Rachel how she felt about the process of becoming a woman and beginning to menstruate in those early days when she first got her period.
I felt like it was very taboo, like talking about a period. It just wasn't really spoken about. And I think the message was it was very common to be on the pill. I think all of my friends, anyone I knew that my age was on the pill. If there was any problems with your period, instead of looking into why that was, looking into like what was behind that, the answer was just to go on the pill. And it was really abnormal if you weren't on the pill. And I think I remember speaking about to my friends that my periods were really heavy, really irregular, really painful, and no one really said anything about it. So yeah, I just think it just wasn't something that was really spoken about very often.
Now, you might not take an oral contraceptive but use another form like an IUD, rod or the injection. I asked Dr. Lara Bryden to explain how IUDs like Mirena worked and what issues that women may experience.
So the hormonal IUD has a couple of effects. The first is locally in the uterus. It suppresses the uterine lining, which it will do in some women more than others, which is why some women get no bleeding at all on the hormonal IUD, as the drug worked locally to completely suppress the buildup of their uterine lining. And for some women, their uterine lining is growing too thick to be completely suppressed, essentially. So they'll still get some bleeding. The second thing with the hormonal IUD is that it is the drug levonorgestrel. So it's a progestin that has androgen-like or testosterone-like effects. So some women are more sensitive to that drug than others in other parts of their body. Like some women might experience mood symptoms. Some women might get skin breakouts from the progestin. That's actually pretty common. The hormonal IUD is associated with an increased risk of ovarian cysts. So some women might experience that. And not everyone is as sensitive to side effects of contraceptive drugs. I think that in large part explains the variation, whereas some women feel great on the hormonal IUD and some women just feel not very good.
I have observed in my years of practice that there are some women that do poorly on any type of contraceptive drug. These women seem to have a particular sensitivity to the side effects of any pill or hormonal IUD and often have tried them all to no avail. In these patients, we focus on working on their gut health, detoxification pathways, and of course, hormonal regulation. And they usually do quite well. It's important to reiterate that, as our experts have mentioned, hormonal contraceptives are not the same as your hormones and they will not behave in the same way. For some women, a hormonal IUD may fare better because the hormones act more locally. But because your uterus is connected to the rest of your body via the bloodstream, many women will still experience symptoms like mood issues or other problems as the progestins circulate through the body. So the question is, what do we do to support ourselves if we have to take hormonal birth control? I asked Dr. Jolene Brighton what she recommends for her patients.
If you're going to use hormonal birth control, you need to be tracking your data that you have in your body. So just as I talk about with autoimmunity, symptoms are going to show up before major changes show up in labs. So this is important for you to understand. We also don't have a lab test to definitively say, oh, you're depressed. So you have to be tracking your symptoms and paying attention to what's going on. It's the only way to evaluate how you're being impacted. So ideally, we would track symptoms for 1 to 3 months before starting birth control. Then once on birth control, continuing to track. So that's just going through your different systems of like, how's your skin? How's your vision? How is your gut? And then of course, reproductive health. You want to have lab testing as well, especially if symptoms come up so that you can understand where is your health currently and if something changes, what's shifted. And most importantly though, is going to be all the things that you do every day to care for your body. So if we know birth control, the pill specifically depletes nutrients in some women, then we want to be eating a whole foods diet. We want to be bringing in cruciferous vegetables, high quality protein. Our liver needs these things in order to detox our estrogen. When you eat and you supply your liver with these nutrients, you're going to have a much easier time getting your hormones into the right metabolites and detoxing, because yes, this is a detox pathway. You'll be detoxing those estrogens, and then with adequate fiber, you'll be removing those through the gut rather than reactivating, reconjugating estrogen, putting it back into circulation. So diet is definitely a focus, but we also need to be considering a multivitamin or prenatal to replenish those nutrient stores. We also want to be making sure that we are moving our body every day, getting great sleep, the laws of nature, like what every organism needs to do. But these things are really important. We want to tend to our circadian rhythm because as cyclical creatures, we are influenced by our circadian rhythm and light-dark cycle. So we definitely want to be taking a look at how are we tending to our sleep? How are we talking to ourselves? So those are some of those key things that some people are going to eye roll. They're like, this again? I want you to ask yourself, how well are you doing it? How well are you drinking water, moving your body every single day, getting good sleep? You're a human, probably not great every single day, but that's the thing that why do you hear so many people saying these same things? Because they work, because they're foundational, and they're the things that you have to be doing to care for yourself.
As I mentioned earlier, our naturopaths at Shift work with many women who are on the pill, coming off the pill, and everything in between. When we look at health, it's never compartmentalised, which you now know from listening to episode 2. So as part of your health plan to assist hormonal health, you want to address your diet and stress levels, but also have a look at things like environmental toxins that may have xenoestrogenic properties. We're going to talk more about this in episode 8, so make sure that you subscribe so that you don't miss a thing. To close off this conversation, I'd love to share some very sage advice from Dr. Jolene Brighton.
We don't have to be afraid. We just need to be informed. What I hear time and again is the scariest thing for women is that they don't know. They just don't know. And that, I think, is really driving so many decisions in women's medicine is fear. And we need to move away from that. Women are smart. Let's give them the information and trust them to make the best decision for themselves.
If these themes resonate with you, I'd recommend checking in with your doctor and maybe making an appointment with one of our specialist naturopaths at Shift. We've worked with thousands of women overcoming hormonal issues, and we would love to assist you. You can book a discovery and diagnosis session with a Shift naturopath by going to theshiftclinic.com. In the next episode of The Shift, we're going to dig into some of the issues that can occur when our hormones are out of whack, such as irregular cycles, PCOS, PMS, acne, and everything in between.
Coming up on The Shift.
In the U.S., up to 1 out of 5 women is suffering from PCOS.
Anything that doesn't feel good is indicative of some type of imbalance.
So most women, if they have a body fat percentage less than 20%, will not ovulate and won't get a period.
I think people are more aware about the importance of nutrition and the importance of avoiding environmental toxins.
PCOS, despite the name polycystic ovary, is nothing to do with cysts on the ovaries.
This series is a production of The Shift Clinic. Hosted by Katherine Maslen. Music and sound design by Shade Furlong. Thank you to all of our experts. For more details on them, go to theshiftclinic.com.
We can be. We must be.
The first generation to end extreme poverty.
The generation most determined to fight injustice
and inequality.
The generation that saves the planet
from climate change.
And this is how we will get it done.
The Global Goals.
A 15-year plan for everyone, everywhere.
With no one left behind.
The Global Goals are a framework that collectively help us
support the health of our people
and the planet.
At Shift, we are ambassadors for the Global Goals.
This project supports Global Goal number 6.
Clean water and sanitation.
Every time you listen
to an episode of The Shift,
we provide a day's access to clean water
for a human in need
in Malawi, Africa.
Water is the foundation to health, and we believe
every human should have access.
to clean, healthy water.
So please share this podcast wide
and keep tuning in
so we can impact those who need it the most.